"I'm sorry, ma'am. This boarding pass doesn't look right for first class. Can you step aside?" Danielle blinked, stunned. She looked at the ticket again, double-checked the seat number 2A, first class. Paid in full. No mistake. Yet the attendant's eyes lingered not on the ticket, but on her. Within seconds, a line of impatient passengers started building behind her. Some whispered, others sighed. And then came the sting. A white man behind her, with a rumpled polo shirt and economy seat number, was let through without a second glance. Danielle's heart sank, but her jaw clenched. She wasn't just being denied a seat. She was being denied her dignity. And what nobody at that gate knew in that moment was that this humiliating act, this single spark of discrimination, would ignite a firestorm so massive that within 24 hours, the CEO of the airline would be forced to resign. So what happened in between? And how could one passenger's voice bring down the most powerful person in the company? Stick with me, because this story isn't just about an airline. It's about courage, exposure, and how injustice crumbles when the truth goes viral. Danielle Brooks wasn't the type of person who usually splurged on herself. She was practical, careful, almost overly responsible. Born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, Danielle was the eldest daughter in a family of 4 kids. Her father had worked 2 jobs as a mechanic and a night shift security guard. And her mother, a retired nurse, always reminded her children of one thing: they'll try to make you feel smaller than you are. Don't let them. You walk into every room like you belong there. Those words had carried Danielle through high school, where she excelled in science fairs and debate teams, even when she was often the only black girl in the room. They carried her through college at North Carolina State University, where she majored in marketing while working part-time in the student library just to afford books. And they carried her through her career, where she climbed the corporate ladder from intern to regional marketing executive in just 8 years. A rare accomplishment for someone her age. Danielle wasn't rich. She wasn't the daughter of privilege. Every achievement she had came from grit, late nights, and sacrifices no one saw. That conference in San Francisco, it wasn't just another work trip. It was an opportunity to network with industry leaders who could open doors for her career, maybe even land her a VP role in the next few years. She had carefully budgeted for the flight, and for once, she told herself, "You deserve this. Fly first class. Sit in that seat like you belong there." The ticket was her quiet celebration, her way of honoring her father's memory and her mother's resilience. But here's the bigger picture, and here's what viewers like you will gain by sticking with the story. Danielle's journey isn't just about one seat on one plane. It's about how ordinary people, when pushed into extraordinary situations, can expose systems of arrogance and prejudice, and force accountability at the very top. Because in less than 24 hours, this moment of humiliation would snowball into national outrage, trending hashtags, breaking news coverage, and eventually, the collapse of an airline CEO's career. But before that explosion, there was silence. The silence of one woman, standing at gate C-17, with dozens of strangers watching her, waiting to see what she would do. Danielle had always been careful with money. While others in her circle splurged on designer bags or weekend getaways, she lived with a quiet restraint. Her 2-bedroom apartment was modest, decorated with framed photos of her late father and a small shelf stacked with leadership books she read religiously. To Danielle, success wasn't about appearances, it was about security. But lately, security had been slipping through her fingers. Her boss at the Charlotte firm had been hinting about budget cuts. Colleagues whispered about realignments. Danielle had been working late nights, often staying past 9 p.m., just to make sure her name stayed off the chopping block. The trip to San Francisco wasn't paid for by her company. She had covered it herself. It was a gamble, an investment in her own future. She wanted to be seen, to be taken seriously, to sit in the same room with executives who rarely looked twice at women who looked like her. And so, after weeks of hesitation, she made the leap. A first-class ticket. It wasn't just about comfort. It was about sending a message to herself that she belonged in spaces she had worked so hard to reach. Her mother, ever the realist, had frowned when Danielle told her, Baby, you could have flown coach and saved that money. First class don't make you more important. Danielle had smiled softly. I know, Mama, but maybe it'll remind me that I already am. The day of the flight, Danielle arrived at Charlotte Douglas International Airport in her best travel outfit. A crisp navy blazer over a cream blouse, black slacks, and polished flats. She wanted to look professional, prepared, the image of a woman who belonged in any room she walked into. She checked her bag, cleared TSA, and made her way to the gate. Everything was smooth, no hiccups. She even allowed herself to relax a little, sipping coffee while scrolling through her presentation slides. But then little cracks began to appear. First, it was the glance. When she approached the gate counter to confirm her seat, the agent, a young woman with a stiff smile, looked her up and down in a way that made her skin prickle. First-class ticket? He asked, as if surprised. Yes, Danielle replied calmly, sliding her boarding pass across the counter. He scanned it, paused, and forced a smile. All right then, you're all set. The tone was subtle, but Danielle noticed. It was the kind of microaggression she had learned to file away in silence. Then came the waiting area. Danielle took a seat near the boarding gate, pulling out her tablet to review her notes. Across from her, two men in suits whispered and glanced her way. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw the smirk. That look of disbelief that said, "What's she doing here?" Danielle straightened her shoulders and ignored them. She had weathered worse, but deep down she could feel it, the tension, the undercurrent of something building. The final sign came moments before boarding. The same gate agent from earlier called her to the counter. Her voice was polite, but her eyes weren't. "Ms. Brooks, could you step over here a moment?" Passengers turned to look. Danielle felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her as she stood, walked to the counter, and leaned in. "Yes?" she asked. She cleared her throat. "There seems to be a problem with your seat assignment." Danielle blinked. "Problem? I booked and paid for this ticket weeks ago." Her smile was tight, almost rehearsed. "Yes, but it looks like, well, we'll sort it out. Just wait here a moment." And that was the moment Danielle knew. This wasn't a glitch. This was something else. Something uglier. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. What she didn't know, not yet, was that this single problem with her seat would explode into a public spectacle, fuel a storm online, and send shockwaves through the very top of the airline's leadership. The gate lights flickered overhead as the boarding announcement for Flight 402 trimmed the murmurs of the waiting room into a thin, expectant hum. Danielle stood at the counter with the boarding pass in her hand and the weight of the moment in her chest. She had rehearsed nothing. There was no fight she planned for. She had simply expected to sit where she had paid to sit. Ada Harris, the gate agent, smiled a smile that did not reach her eyes when she rescanned her ticket. She read the barcode, squinted, then looked up. Not at the document, but at the woman holding it. "Ms. Brooks," she said, the syllables soft as if she were offering a concession rather than a service. "Can you step aside for a minute? We're doing a quick verification for first-class passengers. There seems to be a problem with your record." Danielle felt silence press into her ears. A taut hush. People were watching. The suited man with the economy seat who had already been waved forward. The woman with a toddler clutching plastic toys. Young travelers plugged into their earbuds. Their eyes flicked. Some with curiosity. Some with impatience. Some with that small, casual cruelty that assumes a person is out of place. "I paid in full. Seat 2A, Danielle said. She kept her tone even. She had no intention of letting anger loosen her voice. "Can you show me what the problem is?" Ada gestured to a side counter. "We'll sort it out at the desk. Just wait here for a moment." Moments stretched into minutes. A supervisor arrived. Lisa Monroe, calm in a blazer, clipboard pressed to her chest. She spoke in corporate measured tones designed to defuse and to instruct. But Lisa's eyes slid past Danielle in a way that made Danielle's skin tighten. Two managers in back-of-house uniforms extricated themselves from back rooms to observe. Their presence felt like a judgment that had already been made. Danielle took a breath. Her phone was in her pocket. She could have made the call to her boss, demanded a corporate escalation, or left and booked another flight. But none of those choices protected what was being taken from her in that moment. Her dignity, her right to be treated as any other passenger. "Ms. Brooks," Lisa said finally, her words professional but clipped. "There's a discrepancy in the system. It's probably an error. We'll reissue your pass and get this resolved." A different crew member stepped up, a man wearing the airline's dark coat, with the polite tone of someone trained to contain escalation. "If you'd follow me, ma'am, we'll make sure the records are correct." Danielle followed. She walked past rows of seats and people who had simply become a part of the scenery, until the scenery looked back. A man whose name tag read E. Morales whispered to his companion, "Wonder how that happened." Not a single person intervened. The bystander effect swelled around her like icing. In the little space behind the gate desk, Ada rifled through screens. Computer windows hopped open and closed. An administrator clicked from layout to layout. "There's no record of the upgrade," someone said. "Her file shows economy." Danielle watched screens show the economy entry. Her ticket, the digital record, the card she had in hand, all snapshot pieces of the same truth, but data can be bent if someone wants an outcome. "I booked through my agency," Danielle said. "I paid. Here's the confirmation email." She didn't reach for aggression. She offered paper. The confirmation glowed on her phone screen like a small lighthouse. Ada examined it, the corner of her mouth twitching in that half-smile again. "We'll need to verify through the central system, ma'am. Please wait." She did not say sorry. The absence of apology landed heavier than a slap. Word spread like steam. Some people pulled out phones, not to help, but to record something they had already assumed was entertainment. A few older passengers shook their heads with irritation. Some masked their discomfort with the primacy of scheduling. "Boarding quickly, please." And then a man in a rumpled polo, seat 27B economy, was waved forward by Tom without a second check. He flashed his board pass, breezed through. No questions, no inspection. He walked into first class with the entitled ease of someone used to being seen without explanation. He had the benefit of a glance that said, of course he belongs. That difference, small, sharp, seismic, was the fulcrum. Danielle's face burned hot. She felt the heat of eyes, the weight of the invisible ledger being tallied on her back. She asked for a manager, her voice firm. "I want a supervisor. Now." Lisa, who had taken her clipboard, looked at Danielle and then at Ada, an office lover of policy, forever worried about how friction affected metrics, slid away like a boat finding the river's current. "We'll do a formal verification," she said. "Wait here." Danielle noticed that the clerk's mouse never stopped moving. She wasn't searching for an error on the system. She was performing a script. This felt purposeful. Her stomach dialed down into ice. A man in the crowded waiting area stood up suddenly and interrupted. He had been watching and, unlike most, stepped toward the front. "Excuse me," he said, voice steady. "I think you should let her through. She has a boarding pass." It was a small intervention, an ordinary man who did not know Danielle, standing between her and the proprietary indifference of the airline. The moment he spoke, a ripple ran across the waiting area. A young woman standing with a stroller murmured, "Yeah, what is this?" A teenager narrowed his eyes. The atmosphere shifted. Ada's eyes darted. Under pressure, pre-planned scripts fray. She cleared her throat, her voice bunched with corners. "Sir, please. This is a verification procedure. You're making her prove what others are allowed without a question." The man replied, loud enough for the gate to hear. "That's not right." Danielle felt a strange lift, a buoyant release. People were looking. One person had decided the humiliation was not acceptable. Others were now awake. The gate manager, a senior woman whose badge read Monroe Lead, looked at the crowd, then at Danielle and softened. "Let's get this sorted right now," Lisa said finally. She tapped into the system with more focus. Fingers flew. Minutes passed like hours. Then, as if pulled from a drawer, a new wrinkle was shown. A small internal note on Danielle's file. Typed in from a nondescript email, it said, "Flag for manual boarding check. confirm credentials. Suspicious upgrade. Danielle read it like a legal accusation and felt her breath drop. Suspicious? Suspicion becomes authority when someone with privilege decides you are not worthy of easy passage. That note was a decision to make judgment on her, not to verify a glitch. Who left that note? Danielle demanded, the heat now molten. Who judged my right to sit there? Ada fumbled. System flags are automatic sometimes. Then show me the log, Danielle said. She was no techie, but she knew enough and felt the instincts of someone who'd had to prove herself to survive more than once. Who authorized that flag? A pause. A tangle of fingers over keyboards. The name that finally popped onto the screen was procedural, LA Maint. An internal handle tied, she later learned, to a manager in another regional office. It was a small tag, an unassuming sequence, but the implication was clear. Someone had chosen, and that choice now stood like a barrier. Danielle pulled out her phone and recorded the interaction. Her hands did not shake. She was careful and precise. She would not let her words be rewritten. She spoke directly to the camera, not to the clerk, creating an explicit document of her treatment. People in the terminal watched the filming and watched the attendant watch the filming. These are strange new social coordinates. The first ripple of public accountability began with a small glowing screen. Ms. Brooks, we are going to have to do this manually, Lisa said, voice steel with corporate caution. If you're unable to provide additional ID verification, we may need to assign the seat to someone else. I have my ID, my confirmation, and I have the right to be treated equally, Danielle said. Proceed, or call your supervisor. They proceeded to make her wait through an interlude of thinly veiled hostility. A senior cabin manager arrived and spent an uncomfortably long time checking inventories in the back. Danielle sat in the heroically unforgiving gate chair, while the man in the polo texted a friend from first class. Passengers were shifting now, some conspicuously recording, others whispering, a few crossing the line from curiosity to clear discomfort. A woman in a nursing uniform walked up and said softly, "I'm sorry this is happening to you." A student placed a hand on Danielle's shoulder for a moment and said, "You do deserve that seat." Human connection multiplied into small rescues. But then the call came from above. A voice on a speaker, "This is Mark Davenport, CEO of Airlines. When you left your desk as an executive normally, it took corkscrew urgency, and if Mark's name was on a channel, it meant something top-level had decided to intervene. Davenport's presence should have been an amber of protection. Instead, it sparked a different chain of command. An email from the airline's PR office popped into Danielle's phone, forwarded by a curious passenger who had seen her recording and had enough to do the right thing. "We're aware of the incident at Gate C-17. We are investigating. Patience, please." The inclusion of investigating sounded like a vague corporate buffer. It was at that minute that Danielle realized the fight could leave the terminal. She made a conscious decision to speak in a way that could not be obscured by spin. She stopped recording a private plea and began to tell the story in a short, clear statement. Who she was, why she was traveling, what had happened. She addressed the camera the way a lawyer addresses a jury, short, crisp, and human. Her video lasted 90 seconds. It captured the gate agent's script, the supervisor's evasions, the note on the screen, and the reluctant nod of the man in first class who had been waved through without question. It captured the face of a woman told, without words, that she did not belong. Then she uploaded it to her social feed and tagged the airline. In an age when quiet indignations can be amplified into megaphones, that 90-second recording was a match struck in dry grass. The digital shift happened fast. An hour later, her 30-second live clip had a few hundred views. Not viral by the internet's terms, but it was 1,000 times the attention she could have summoned standing alone at the gate. A friend reposted. A local activist with a modest following reshared. Within 4 hours, the clip hit a few thousand. The hashtag Seat for Danielle started to swell. What she hadn't predicted was the multiplier effect of human generosity in modern networks. An influencer, Jasmine Lee, a travel vlogger with a couple million followers, happened to be at a nearby gate and retweeted Danielle's video to her audience with a caption. "This is unacceptable. Airline must explain. Jasmine's one tweet pushed the clip into thousands more feeds, and a local online reporter called the PR line for comment. Now, the airline's PR team shifted from patience to damage control. Mark Davenport, the CEO who often avoided these mid-tier PR scrapes, now woke to his phone buzzing. He knew, firsthand from previous minor incidents, how small indignities could balloon into corporate crises. He called for a live statement from the airline. Back in Charlotte, passengers in the terminal were being held up while the airline's wheels turned. But the narrative had changed. What started as a personal humiliation had become an emblem of the airline's possible systemic problem. The first official statement from Aerostar read like a diplomat's apology. "We are committed to equal treatment for all passengers and are reviewing the matter. We apologize for any inconvenience." Felt paper thin. It didn't address the suspicious upgrade notation visible on the screen. An actionable human decision. Words are weightless until someone attaches consequence. Within 12 hours, the video migrated from social channels into mainstream coverage. Local news reported the humiliation. A morning show invited Danielle to sit for an interview. She declined the first wave of camera calls because she wanted to prepare. Her boss at the Charlotte office called and placed a protective blanket of support under her, telling her to take only calls from established news organizations and a lawyer if one contacted her. A civil rights attorney named Tamara Jenkins reached out. Tamara had seen the clip when it went viral and recognized legal patterns of discriminatory enforcement. "Document everything," she told Danielle in a patient, precise voice. "You did right by recording. Keep it safe. We'll mount a response." Meanwhile, the airline's internal channels were twisting into different knots. Senior leaders convened in emergency calls to triage. Mark Davenport expected a limited PR flare-up. He did not expect an email leak. An anonymous email, sent to a small set of regional reporters, contained internal guidance documents clipped from a training portal. The memos were dry, but a particular passage stuck out. "Use manual verification selectively during high-demand flights to ensure first-class integrity." It read like corporate speak, but beneath the veneer it supplied plausible deniability for gate agents. It could be weaponized if the policy allowed subjective judgment under the banner of integrity. Then the question became who was being judged. People on social media did not wait for nuance. They read the phrase manual verification and recognized a mechanism that could be misused. Conversations spooled into calls for investigation. The hashtag moved from hashtag #SeatForDanielle to hashtag #AerostarBias, and the online petitions began. Mark Davenport now faced a choice: invoke legalistic PR and delay, or appear swift and unilateral. He chose the latter. He issued a statement: "Aerostar does not condone discrimination. An internal review will be launched immediately, and anyone found acting inappropriately will be disciplined." The problem with that approach: when leaders respond with showy decisiveness before a full account is assembled, those moves are often read as tone-managed cover. The public had already seen the video and the leaked memo. The skepticism deepened. At the airline's headquarters in Atlanta, board members paced. They had shareholders to appease, but in the digital age it wasn't only money on the line. Brand and trust evaporated faster. One board member, older and battle-scarred, said aloud what others only whispered: "If this is systemic, someone at the top needs to own it." The media's appetite sharpened. The story bent toward pattern. If the airline's guidance allowed manual checks in a way that enabled discriminatory enforcement, then the problem was not one rogue gate agent, but the culture that permitted her to be flagged as suspicious. The next turning moment came with the emergence of another video. An airport employee, fed up after seeing the clip, had posted a grainy but revealing clip of internal training sessions. In it, an operations manager had joked about efficiency metrics and making sure the front cabin looks a certain way. The camera panned to a small laugh from a group of middle managers who had the gall to treat passenger presence as an aesthetic to be curated. The optics were damning because they revealed not an accidental bias but a casual culture. It was the difference between one person doing wrong and an organization that normalized a narrow definition of belonging. Now the calls were urgent and political. State representatives demanded a formal inquiry. Consumer advocacy groups called Mark Davenport's office to request an official hearing. On television, commentators alternated between outrage and analysis. Danielle found herself in the odd center of an enormous snowball. She did not crave the spotlight, yet she had become the credible witness who started a chain reaction. She decided she would not be a mere face in a news piece. She met Tamara Jenkins and they built a plan. Secured statements, a civil suit option, a formal complaint to the Department of Transportation, and a push for public policy changes that would eliminate vaguely worded gate discretion. The corporate climb toward pressure culminated 3 days after the initial incident in what the industry would later call the boardroom overnight. Mark Davenport was scheduled to appear on a morning news program to clarify the airline's position. Instead, the live interview became a crucible. The anchor, Jasmine Fry, had prepared questions that would cut to the chase. Mr. Davenport, there is video showing a passenger denied first-class boarding even though she had a ticket. How do you explain that your staff interpreted policy in a way that led to that outcome? Davenport, trained in PR and damage control, opened with the company line that they were committed to equality and that their investigation had begun. Fry pressed, then why did the leaked internal training mention manual verification as a tool to maintain the premium experience? She asked. Does the company acknowledge how that language can create subjective enforcement against passengers? He faltered, then offered a version of corporate mea culpa. We regret the unfortunate interaction. Terms like manual verification should not be used to profile passengers. We have instructed immediate retraining. The retraining announcement should have calmed waters, but it did not. Less than an hour later, a new, more explosive leak landed in the hands of the press. Internal emails between mid-level operations managers demonstrated a practice of flagging passengers for manual verification based on appearance inconsistencies. The phrase was clinical, but its meaning was frank. These were not isolated mistakes. They were discretionary enforcement protocols applied unevenly. When the email excerpts were published on a major news site, viewers recoiled. The images of the emails had authoritative headers, timestamps, and footprints that made denial difficult. A board emergency session convened. Investors called. Regulators issued statements that they were monitoring the situation. Mark Davenport's credibility had been drained. The board pressured him. He could either carry the company through transparent reform and remain as a leader guiding change, or step aside to preserve what moral authority the company had left. He chose to resign. His resignation statement was sober than raw. As CEO, the responsibility for the tone and policies of Aerostar rests with me. Recent disclosures show systemic failures in our processes and culture. For the company to rebuild trust, I am stepping down effective immediately and will cooperate fully with investigators. News cameras descended on the headquarters as Mark Davenport, flanked by security, left the building carrying a box of personal items. People outside chanted, "Justice" and "accountability." The viral momentum, kindled by a short video at Gate C-17, had blown into a gale capable of toppling a CEO. For Danielle, the victory felt complicated. It was a vindication that came with echoes of public spectacle. She'd wanted fairness, not a resignation party. And yet she could not deny the bomb of accountability. In the halls of the airline, there were now real consequences for language that had once been flippant. The company's board quickly appointed an interim CEO with a mandate for cultural reform. Promises were made. Independent audits, new training protocols, restitution for affected passengers, and the removal of vaguely worded practices that allowed subjective gate enforcement. The Department of Transportation opened an inquiry into the airline's practices. Danielle gave testimony to the DOT investigators. She described what happened at the gate with clarity and quiet emotion. She recounted the look on the attendant's face, the on-screen flag saying "suspicious upgrade." The man waved through without inspection, and the small kindnesses of strangers. She told the story like a ledger that demanded correction. As investigations unfolded, other passengers came forward. Some reported being denied boarding for similar reasons. An employee whistleblower provided additional internal emails that showed how manual verification boxes had been used to slow down certain passengers until they left, or until gate agents felt like they had protected the cabin. That internal chain corroborated a systemic issue. In the weeks that followed, Airlines moved to contain the damage with the kind of structural changes one sees when a corporate body is trying to heal a badly broken bone. Policies were rewritten in plain language. An independent ethics investigator was appointed. All gate staff underwent customer service and anti-bias training, and the company paid fines and settlement costs to a class that included passengers who'd endured similar treatment. Danielle, offered counsel and a place at the table for restitution talks, was pragmatic. She accepted compensation, but insisted the company fund a scholarship in her father's name and a training program for frontline staff to explicitly outlaw subjective, manual verification tags. She wanted structural change, not personal reward. Tamara Jenkins negotiated an agreement where Airline contributed to a community fund for travel access and pledged to create a dashboard that publicly reported gate complaints and their resolution. Transparency, Danielle believed, would prevent future quiet abuses. The airline also agreed to a mandated reporting mechanism for any verification activity, with logs accessible to regulators and an ombudsperson for passengers. The cultural shift within the airline was messy and vital. No single policy could cure years of normalized bias, but a combination of public scrutiny, internal review, and sustained oversight forced the company to face itself. Executives were replaced, processes rewired, and the small library of training videos that had once been used as a shield were reworked into meaningful curriculum. Danielle's story rippled outward. She received invitations to speak at conferences about corporate accountability and traveled to Washington to testify at a transportation oversight hearing. Reporters and commentators praised her calm courage. Activists credited the viral clip with starting a national conversation about everyday discrimination and the power of bystanders to effect change. Her career trajectory shifted. She was offered a consultancy role to help other companies craft fair boarding policies and train staff in equitable enforcement. Her network expanded. Invitations, appearances, and offers pooled at her email. But she chose carefully. Danielle did not want her experience commodified for clout. She accepted only positions and partnerships that matched her vision. Fairness, structural transparency, and dignity. People in the airport who had stood at gate C-17 felt the reverberations too. The man who had first spoken up on her behalf came forward publicly, and his small act of courage was celebrated as a moment of moral good. Janice, the receptionist who had passed Danielle a granola bar years before, was part of a group that started a small advocacy network supporting transit workers and passengers in discrimination disputes. Airline's stock recovered slowly, but the company's brand had been changed. Competitors used the scandal as a platform to tout their own policies, and regulators increased scrutiny industry-wide. Travel blogs and consumer sites published pieces advising travelers how to document poor treatment and urging airlines to adopt transparency mechanisms. Danielle rarely looked back at the humiliation in the gate. She preferred to remember the small kindnesses and the broader victory. But the memory remained crisp when she taught workshops about asserting dignity. When you are treated as less than, document it. Record what you can. Get support. Use your voice and other people's voices. If there's one image that stayed with people long after the headlines faded, it wasn't the CEO walking out with a cardboard box. It was the photograph of Danielle boarding the next time she flew. This time in first class, clasping the armrest gently, looking at the world with the steeled openness of someone who had stood up and refused to be erased. She didn't smile for cameras the way a celebrity might. Her expression was steadier, resolute, at peace. That steadiness became the lesson. The truth about the airport is that it is a place where people cross thresholds constantly, of comfort, of class, of dignity. When a system makes those thresholds subjective, it creates harm. When one person with a small camera and a quiet will interrupts the script, it exposes a pattern that power can no longer deflect. But the broader lesson was not only about one airline. It was about the leverage of ordinary people in a networked world. It was about bystanders who choose to act. It was about corporate cultures that assume they can control narratives and the way those narratives can unspool when enough people see. Danielle started a small mentorship program, working with young marketing professionals of color who needed a model of how to stand both gentle and firm. She encouraged people to make tactical choices, record when safe, document, ask for supervisors, and call on allies. She urged companies to listen proactively to the people they serve and to the employees who carry the corporate mission into the real world. In her final public remarks months after the CEO's resignation, she said, "I did not want to be a symbol. I wanted to be treated like a person. But if being visible helps others feel less alone, then I will stand in that light." Justice is not a single headline. It's the daily work of building processes that reflect equity. The story of Gate C-17 was a small meteor in the public sphere that burned bright. It left behind char and a changed landscape. It reminded people that dignity is not an entitlement reserved for some. It is a basic social currency we all owe one another. If this story resonated with you, here are a few things you can do to keep the momentum. Share the video to raise awareness, tell your own story in the comments, and hit subscribe so more ordinary people's extraordinary moments get the attention they deserve. Tell us, what would you have done at Gate C-17? Would you have recorded, intervened, or walked away? Drop your thoughts below. The conversation matters.